this way. I think we're technology traumatized here. I don't know about you guys, but my heart is beating at the same rate as these clicks. Whew. All right, so I'm going to talk about Thesaurus and automatic indexing, so it's a bit changed pace from what we've been doing. Let's see if I can move this so the clicker isn't working either for the forthcoming speakers. All right, so many people will tell you you don't need a taxonomy to do automatic indexing, and that's true if you just want relevance. But if you want accuracy and precision in your search, then I would highly recommend a taxonomy. Relevance is my guess that I got what you want delivered to you. So it's a highly subjective system, and it's very popular in some areas, not with me. And if you want to auto-index, then you should build a tool that'll support the auto-indexing. And that doesn't mean that you can't do a lot of other things, but it's, I think building a taxonomy with that in mind is a good idea. So I'm going to build on what Heather said earlier about Thesaurus. You have a choice as to whether you build one or you buy one or you do a combination of the two. You can adopt an existing thesaurus, and it's a fast and easy way to get started. It rarely covers your content exactly because it was built for somebody else's content, but there is a process to adapt it, and I'm going to go through that in a little bit. Building your own thesaurus takes a fair amount of time and effort, but then it will accurately reflect your content. Everybody else has put up with this, but I'm not putting up with it. And so sometimes a compromise is a good idea. I mean, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, there was not a large number of thesauri available for you to adopt. And now there are. People have built them fairly recently, are willing to share, particularly people that are not-for-profit or government organizations. And that's because a thesaurus is an outline of knowledge, and they just assume that you follow theirs. So if you can adopt their thesaurus, then it's a fast way to move. But in order to know whether that's a good idea or not, you should really test it on your own content. Make sure it indexes properly, and then augment it as needed. So when we're creating a thesaurus, we often identify a lot of things that are available, existing taxonomies, existing lists. Most people categorize what they've got in-house in some way or another. And so you get the content creator perspective when you look at the way people have made their lists and done attempts at outlining their knowledge internally. But in order to get the user perspective, instead of doing card sorts and exhaustive surveys and interviews, we have found that using the search logs is the most effective way to get an idea of what people are really doing. Because they say they're doing this, but what they're really doing is reflected in those search logs. So if you have a website or you already have a database, then I would strongly recommend you get a hold of search logs and get an idea of what people are really asking for in your system. And then either that's what you're going to use as taxonomy terms, because that's what they're asking for, or you have to manage their expectations because you don't have that content and they think you do. But either way, it's a pretty interesting way to get very quickly to a lot of terms that you need to include. There are a lot of text analytics programs, ones that use n-grams, in certain number of words here, 2 words, 3 words for search, even just 1, and pull out those from the text and sort those, frequency sort them, and get an idea of how many there are, and then you can use that as a source for terms. You can also look at word co-occurrence, what things occur in the same abstract or the same body or the same title even of your text. And if they go together, then likely they've got some kind of a relationship in your field, and you ought to exploit that in some way. Using those word lists and other word lists like the back of the book indexes and tables of contents, you get a good source of things that you can compare to an existing thesaurus to see whether the words from your own content actually match the words from the thing you think you might want to adopt. And then there's a matter of style. If you're a large corporation, they often have some kind of a style guide. If you're a publisher, you certainly follow a style guide. So make sure that the target thesaurus matches the style that you use, because if you have to redo the style, sometimes that's the most exhausting process. And then, of course, finally, there's author-supplied keywords, free text keywords, whatever you call them, but words that people supply with their manuscript that they want to use for indexing and for choosing peer reviewers and so on. Once you have those terms, you want to ensure that they're well formed. That means that they should all be singulars or they should all be plurals, following the how much, how many kinds of rules. If it's how many, it's frequently plural. If it's how much, it's frequently singular. Did I get that right? Yeah. You don't say how many nickels. You say how, it's how much. And then you load those terms into some kind of a thesaurus application, which could be a spreadsheet, or it could be much more sophisticated than that, and organize your terms into arrays or a hierarchy. You want to establish relationships from those terms, and that's something that's not really part of that whole, but it's related to it. So nurses are not hospitals, but they're related to hospitals. You might make that a related kind of term. And then add synonyms and other non-preferred versions. So if you're making a multilingual thesaurus, you might have a Spanish view and a German view, and the European Union and the Eurovoc thesaurus has 27 languages that they implement, but they are not straightforward conceptual translation. They are not straightforward translations, they are conceptual translations. You can't just say, I'll just use Google Translate, because you'll get some hilarious results that you really won't want. And then the SME reviews are critical, but do them late in the process when you already have a good idea of how the thesaurus is put together, how it's built, so you can defend why you placed something where you placed it, or else knowledgeably move it. If you do SME too early in the process, you look like an idiot. Once you've built that thesaurus or taxonomy, you have to accommodate changes in terminology as time moves forward. There's new content, there's new topics, there's new institutional uses, and you want to be sure that you're able to accommodate those pretty rapidly, because the thesaurus is never complete. It's always growing with your content. And you add a new journal, you add a new editor, they've got a different way of speaking, you need new terms. I do encourage ongoing review by experts, even if you just consider the experts to be those people that are searching your content, that is, looking them up in the search logs themselves. You also want to capture new synonyms, or NPTs, non-preferred terms, as they occur to you, because unless you're a dyed-in-the-wool punster, the new term uses don't always occur to you right away. And then also look for the accuracy of your indexing and get feedback on that as many ways as you can. And I'll continue with that. When you're doing that regular content review, of course, I mentioned that you're looking for changes in terminology and new synonyms, abbreviations, and other non-preferred terms. And you have to make those adjustments. It's just a way that you have to stay familiar with the literature and the terminology. So the taxonomist for your organization needs to keep up with all that stuff, or they need somebody who can help them keep up. When you are doing reviews, you need to be sure you get a good cross-section of your content. You need the different topics, the different document types or formats, all of the different publications that you publish if the taxonomy covers several of them. Get feedbacks from both the searchers via the search logs, but also from the people that are applying those terms to your content on a regular basis. And then keep track of the accuracy via hit, miss, and noise statistics, and I'll define those in a second. And you can never have enough synonyms, so just keep adding synonyms. That's the way you improve the reach of your search. For auto-indexing, which is, to me, if you build a taxonomy and you're not going to apply it to your text, then you've kind of wasted an awful lot of money. So we're looking for ways to apply this taxonomy or thesaurus to text. And it doesn't have to be a thesaurus or taxonomy. It can be that whole, Heather showed an arrow grid that started with pick lists and ended with ontologies. All of those things in between lend themselves to automatic indexing. So statistical systems, as Heather said, need training sets, but they fall into a number of different areas. And if you go into computational linguistics or automated language processing studies, there's a great deal of debate and consideration constantly, and a great deal of government funding that goes to support research in these areas. So one of the oldest one is Bayes. It follows the Bayes theorem, looking for things that might be talked about together. And that leads to vector analysis, which is also a very popular methodology. Neural nets are things where terms kind of begin to gather together logically, and so they're heavily used. And co-occurrence is another way of looking at neural nets where things are often found together and therefore would be useful to index together. Natural language processing is a little bit different in that it looks at the word forms, it looks at the semantic, syntactic, morphological, grammatical. There are 9 tenets. I think I can remember them all off the top of my head. Stemming and linguistical applications and so on. So there's a whole study called NLP, which is not to be confused with ALP, so natural language processing versus automated language processing, and those guys don't get along. I mean, I know some computer science departments where they sit next door to each other, but they won't talk to each other anymore. And then there's a completely different methodology, which is the rules-based systems. At the moment, rules-based systems seem to be more ascendant, but I'm sure with a new discovery on the ALP side, that'll change. But where do the terms go? So David talked about putting them in the EPUB format. And so did Bob, actually. And that's one place that they go, but the DocBook format also has a place for the indexing terms, as does JATS. Most of my clients are scholarly publishers. Most of them publish journals, and therefore JATS is kind of what we're about. And the JATS record has available in it both additional terms that you add, so that's an easy place to plop terms. Once you have the full JATS processed, you can add a field for the term to the JATS. You can also do it inline. There's a capability within the JATS syntax to add inline tagging, which is much like the embedded that David was talking about, where you put the term and the concept, a link to that right at that point in the full text. So that if your search system allows, you can zoom right to that point in the text, or you can browse along in the text. It's much like looking at a Word document and finding the next edition of whatever word you're looking for. I did want to mention just quickly when we talk about index, the Anderson report resulted, James Anderson wrote, he was in charge of rewriting the indexing standard, the Z39.18 standard for NISO. And he got so much pushback from the two camps that he decided that his document, which is very well done, he would abandon it. And NISO wasn't quite so eager to abandon it, so they published it as their technical report 2. The camps were the back of the book indexers and the online indexers, and man, they couldn't agree on snot. I tell you what, they were at war with each other. And so, as Heather pointed out some sections of that thing this morning, and it's a great piece of work. I highly recommend, if you're confused about indexing at all, read his report. It's very well done, but it'll also give you a feel for the fact that back of the book indexing and or open and closed indexing versus the indexing required for supporting online search are a bit different. I think that's all I need to say about that. Okay, so when we talk about the statistical systems, back to that after my short digression, we're talking about the Bayes or the vectors or the neural nets or the co-occurrence, all those kinds of systems. All of them require training sets so that you can find documents where the word, your target word, is used correctly at least once in that document. And generally, they need 50 to 100 instances per proper use of the term. So we lost a bid once for one of those, but then they gave us the job of collecting the training sets, and we made a lot more money collecting the training sets than we would have made on the software sale. So it was moot for me. You usually need to look at about 4 records to get one where it's used exactly properly as a main focus and not as a side topic. So you need to collect and review 200 to 400 records in order to get 100 records per term for your thesaurus, and you also can't do it automatically. Somebody needs to look at those. And then you need to retrain the full corpus, because you need to reset all those statistics and vectors every time you add a new term. For NLP and rules-based systems, NLP is usually combined with other techniques, so rules and NLP go well together. It parses the text for meaning, so it'll stem to the word root, for example, or look at the way that it's used in text and so on. The NLP is not usually used with a thesaurus, but it can be, but it looks for patterns of meaning. So it may or may not be used with training sets, and you need to retrain it when you add new terms. Rule-based systems requires the rules themselves for indexing. I have 5 minutes left. Whew, I gotta hurry. 80% of the rules are built automatically. So if it's a match or a simple rule, a synonym, it gets built automatically. 20% of them require complex rules, and those usually take about 5 minutes to build, and every time you add a term, you need to build a rule. For auto indexing, you want 80 to 85% accuracy, which means you got 15 to 20% that's either irrelevant or noise, and you need to decide how good is good enough for your system. You want to evaluate that accuracy based on a bunch of statistical measures and benchmarks. There are go, no-go points, and you do have to choose to maintain that system over time. Hit, miss, and noise statistics are those where a hit is something that the indexer would also choose. A miss is something that the machine didn't get, but the human would add. And noise is something that the computer added, but a human indexer would not. So you can have relevant and irrelevant noise. You know, the indexer might be wrong. Subjective indexing is usually relevance and aboutness, and the precision that you can get with hit, miss, and noise gives you the statistics to give you precision statistics, recall statistics, and then you want to look at the cost. So precision is the item was indexed with exactly what I wanted. That's a hit. Recall is out of everything in the database, how many did I get that are exactly on the topic? You, of course, want to get 100% recall and 100% precision, and that's a healthy tension that's not always achieved. So I just talked about that. And I talked about that. So relevance is how akin it is to the user's request, and aboutness is a close topical match. How how close, how well did I index that document? How close did I get to the aboutness? For ROI, it's the cost of the system, the cost of getting the system ready, ongoing maintenance, whether you've increased efficiency or not, and the quality of retrieval, and the cost of maintaining the system. I do have some ROI calculations here, but I'm not going to go through them because Heather already gave me the 5-minute mark, so I can't do it. If you have a 5,000 term thesaurus and 1.5 synonyms per item, then you've got 7,500 terms total. If you want to hit 85% accuracy, which to me is a benchmark, if you get, you usually get 50% noise, 50% misses, and if that's not too bad for what you're looking at, that's when productivity actually happens, is at 85%. If you have a system that only gives you 60% accuracy, it's not a productivity enhancer. If you assume $55 an hour for staff and a 1,000 record test batch, then the statistical system is going to cost you to gather those terms, which gives you the, let's see, 82,500 to gather the records. You have to review the records, and we think you can do about 20 an hour to get an accuracy count, so that's 50 hours, and it might cost you about 75,000 a year. Then the total is going to be 309,000 the first year, and then after that 75,000 plus IT support. In a rule-based system, because you're building rules instead of training it, that cost is only $68.75, and if you process and look at 20 an hour, that's the same cost. The system is $60,000 for the first year and $9,000 for maintenance, and so the total cost the first year is $87,925, and then $9,000 a year thereafter, plus IT support, whatever that comes out to be. There are lots of other uses for these systems, and I'm happy to send these slides to whoever wants them if they want to go through those calculations, because I really whizzed through them, I'm sorry. There are lots of other ways to use your thesaurus. And once your content is indexed, you can leverage that index content in many ways, particularly if at the time you receive the manuscript, you index it, you can automate the peer review process. For peer review and selection, you can ask your reviewers to profile themselves. You can profile the authors by the papers they publish, and it speeds that very expensive process. You can certainly use it for browsing on the website. You can use it to cluster conference papers as they come in, so you can sort them into tracks, for example. You can filter and let people get particular topics by having this manuscript indexed. You can send it out to people who've chosen that category as an area where they're interested in. That's very helpful for membership organizations. You can, of course, do member profiles as well as reviewer profiles. You can create new collections out of the content because you've got it indexed, preferably to the most specific level, and a whole lot more. I have a huge presentation on what else you can do. Heather showed you an older version of data harmony, so I slipped in a new one in the slide deck. This is the Thesaurus Master. This is the Automatic Indexing System, MAI. There's also a entity extraction system, a system for automatically clustering papers by topic. Whoops. There's a sentiment analysis, so you get an idea of the tone of papers, very useful for people that are in news, for example. This one is term identification, new term systems, and the last one is automatic summarization. So just a quick look. Anyway, what we looked at here was what I wanted to emphasize in my points is that the thesaurus gives you control of the terminology. If you're a corporation, it helps guide people who speak lots of different areas, engineering and production and the chemists, all into the same tagging of the documents, whatever they want to call it, within their own group. It leads to a unified conceptual coverage. It gives a good broad synonymy, and it'll support auto-indexing. But again, if you don't plan to apply that thesaurus to your content, it's really a sunk cost. Okay, so do you need a thesaurus for indexing? If you want precision and recall and findability, discoverability, yes. If relevance will suffice, then don't bother. Just use the Lucene system as it comes out of the box. If you want to, you can adopt an existing thesaurus. It's really helpful. It makes the process go a whole lot faster. You can do something in 2 months that might have taken you a year. We reviewed the major kinds of auto-indexing, looked at some cost comparison, whizzed through an ROI, looked at methods, and talked about other uses. So that's it. Thank you very much.